All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's BU Professional Development webinar, Staying Focused, How to Plan, Prioritize, and Boost Your Productivity. My name is Jeff Murphy. I work on the Career Programs team here in the BU Office of Alumni Relations. Today's webinar is sponsored by BU Alumni Relations and is offered to our 326,000 alumni around the globe. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals. We aim to do this by providing our alumni with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. I know that we have alumni joining us from all over the world, alumni from Belize, Bilbao, Spain, London, Hong Kong, Bangalore, Morocco, Peru, Thailand, Tempe, Arizona, Denver, Colorado, Woodbury, Minnesota, Sammamish, Washington, and as always, dozens of Massachusetts alumni from towns like Shrewsbury, Hudson, Chestnut Hill, Springfield, Lincoln, Rentham, Woburn, and more. For each and every one of you out there, we really appreciate your participation and know that we value your opinion on this and every program that we offer. Before I introduce today's speaker, some brief housekeeping notes. As you know by now, this webinar is being hosted on our Zoom online meeting platform. If you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of today's presentation, I'll ask that you contact Zoom support directly. If you want to jot down a phone number, you can reach Zoom support at 1-888-799-9666. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the Alumni Association website, found at www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions you may have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A box. You can find the Q&A box by hovering over the top or bottom of your screen and clicking on Q&A. Just go ahead and type your question in, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, BU Graduate School of Arts and Sciences alumnus, Stefan Kalt. Stefan Kalt is an Associate Executive Coach at Leading Minds Executive Coaching, LLC. After completing his graduate studies here in philosophy here at BU, he went on to teach humanities and social sciences in the BU core curriculum program, where he facilitated in-depth discussions about the central texts of the Western and Eastern philosophical traditions. Stefan, we'll have to have you do another webinar about some of that content. He later trained at the Center for Executive Coaching, and this background makes Stefan uniquely capable when helping his clients apply rigorous and creative thinking to their leadership, professional, and executive function challenges. You can learn more about Stefan and his work visiting his website. I know you'll talk about that a little bit, Stefan, but you can go to leadingmindsexecutivecoaching.com and look for Stefan Kalt. Stefan, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time. I'm going to go ahead and get my slides down, and then sorry, I have just lost my screen here. Let me get that back. But you should go ahead and share your slide deck by hitting share my screen.
Okay.
Looks good. I see it on my end. Perfect.
You see it?
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, for that introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for joining this webinar. I hope you find it helpful. I have a title here, From Organization to Action, which hooks up with the title which Jeff gave you. There's some overlap. I'm going to be talking about prioritization. I'm going to be talking about certain ways to boost productivity. And as was said earlier, if you've got any questions, just send them on in. We should have about, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes to a half an hour at the end to take those questions. I'd be happy to give you my take on any concerns you've got about productivity, et cetera, and ways that might help you there. So to start off, I want to give just a brief outline of this. The first part, I'll be talking about organizing projects and tasks, okay, and how that's part of a general workflow. I'm going to move on to scheduling and prioritizing, efficient ways to do this, and how that can plug back into projects and tasks as stated in the beginning. And finally, I will be talking about increasing productivity, some productivity hacks, and just kind of wrapping it all up as a whole. Okay, so that's kind of the overarching view of this. Jeff, I believe we were going to do a poll at the very start. Do you want to kick that in?
Sure. I'm going to pull up poll question number 1, and you should see that right now, Stefan.
Great. So there's a quite basic question here and 5 answers you can select from. And here's the question: what is your current go-to tool for staying organized? I make to-do lists. use a calendar. I use an organization app. Maybe someone else keeps you organized. Maybe you wing it. You take a little time and just think about sort of what is your top tool. You might use a number of these tools, but perhaps you've got a kind of go-to tool as your first option.
Stefan, we've got a good crowd on here today, and we got about 65% who have weighed in. So folks, last couple seconds here, weigh in with your choices, and we'll go ahead and publish those results.
Great.
So far, nobody has said someone else keeps me organized. I guess we don't have any CEOs on the webinar today.
I didn't think so.
All right, well, we've got a critical mass here, so let's take a look. And you should see those results now, Stefan. Can you see them on your screen?
Yeah, I see. Okay. I make to-do lists, 56%. I use a calendar, 24%. I use an organization app, 14%. Still nobody in with no personal servants here. And then I wing it, about 6%, 5-6%.
Yeah,
okay.
3 people admitted to just totally winging it. It's good that they're here today.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, great. So look, a lot of the things that people use, you'll find them in part of my slide deck, but I'm trying to bring it all together, really. There are many different tools out there, and people have different habits, and hopefully I'll give you some ideas. If you like something, take it. If it doesn't sound like the kind of thing that really works for you, it's not your style, forget about it. I'm really all about what is effective for a person in an individual case. But I do have an overall approach, and it's something to consider. Once again, think about it, see if it fits in with your basic instincts about self-organization, etc. And take what you like and leave the rest. Okay. So first part of this is organizing projects and tasks. And from the get-go, I'll just say that I am all about to-do lists. I see most of you keep them. Some people don't. Some people might have a really good working memory. They don't need the lists. Maybe they need the lists, and this is the time to consider using lists. Okay. So when I'm talking about organizing projects and tasks, I mean project lists, task lists mainly. That's what I have in terms of information, how to get it organized and regimented. Okay. And here's what I think is a great way to start this. Now, although much of what I'll say is geared to the workplace, since work is tangent with everything else, you've got a lot of things going on in your life. Those can impinge on work, efficiency, productivity there. I think one great habit, a practice, is to take a look at your life as a whole, to get a kind of bird's eye view of your life, your various commitments, projects and tasks that you might have going in various sectors of your life. And to give an example of what I mean here, of course, career work, that's what we started with. Family, okay? Any kind of relationships that you've got going, health and wellness, finances, money, stuff like that. Home or chores, so the domestic side of the equation, fun, hobbies, vacations, hopefully part of fun, but I sometimes think of it as a separate area to consider when you're planning, community or service, and then say emotional or spiritual side. Okay, you might wonder, well, what's the use of getting this view at this altitude? I think that when you see the bigger picture, you can see the small stuff too. Okay, they really hook up with each other, and this can actually make you more productive on a daily basis. You can see where things intersect, and it's a great idea jogger for anything you might want to do. Things hook up, you begin to see how health and wellness might be impacting what you're doing in terms of your career. Perhaps you want to cultivate some hobbies, you want to have some fun times, some sort of, they say, work-life balance, ideas for that, and then you see how that connects with other things as well. So I say kind of getting on top of the mountain and taking a look at your life through these categories can help you organize your life in a way that is more systematic. Okay, it's about being systematic and about being holistic. And then you can drill down to some of the details. So, as I'll be discussing, you can get into specifics regarding career and work, vacation, or emotional, spiritual, and you have a sense of how this might be weighing against other things and be able to tighten things up. Okay, and Bobby, this list is to some extent arbitrary. This is not the only way to slice and dice a person's life. There are other ways to do this. I think these are some careers that probably most people, categories that probably most people can agree upon. You can think of some categories that aren't here, add them to your list, and maybe some of these don't quite apply to you. Okay, but this is just a way to get started. Now, in terms of the sort of the DNA, the nuts and bolts of our lives, especially in the context of productivity, it usually comes down to goals, tasks, and projects. Okay, goals, tasks, and projects. So I want to just define these a little bit here. Simply, goal is something that you want to accomplish. Okay, and I'm defining a project as a sequence of tasks which serve a purpose or a goal. I'm going to use the term goal and project a bit interchangeably throughout this webinar. They definitely overlap, but a project implies steps that you've considered or thought about that are in the service of a goal or a purpose. A goal, you might have that as an idea. It could be a little bit nebulous. You haven't really thought it through, but it implies an endpoint or a target. Okay, and so sometimes when you're thinking of what you want to do, you may not be able to immediately cash out goals in terms of steps. Just get them down on your list anyway. Later on, think about them in terms of, gee, what steps do I need to take to achieve that goal? Hence the beginning of a project. And finally, a task. And I'm defining a task as any action which you don't think you need to break down into smaller actions. That's it. Tasks are going to add up to various steps which are part of a project. Okay, they serve a project, and the project, as I said, is geared towards the goal. And here's some examples of tasks and projects, just to give you a more concrete sense of what I'm talking about. You know, so it could be call the boss, select a publishing format, get last quarter sales info, etc. You can see these are plausible tasks, things that you might not feel you need to sort of break down into component tasks. And projects, publish a book, okay, write profits report, finalize budget, learn new software, reorganize your garden, form a rock band, or visit Madrid, okay? So when I talk about a project and I speak about various tasks, you have a sense of what I'm driving at. Sometimes projects, of course, will consist of not just tasks, but sub-projects. So there's plenty of room to sort of dig even deeper. And one person's task can be another person's project. You know, it all comes down to where you see yourself as not having to think about it anymore. Okay, what kind of step don't you have to break down for you anymore? You've kind of got that covered. Someone else might have to take it to a more detailed level, and it could become a project. Okay, and vice versa. Some people's projects are other people's tasks. You know, they're just very simple. They don't have to think about it. These are interchangeable, and it's really relative to the individual. Right. And as I said, I think these are just a plausible way of looking at it that most people might agree upon. Now, I think it's a great way to get the items that are ongoing in your life in view. I already talked about the life domains. Some people call them hotspots, okay, areas of your life where you've got things going on or want to get things going. Okay, how do you end up connecting tasks and projects to those domains, which is what I'm going to get into, okay? Well, I propose doing something called a brain dump. Do it once in your life, okay? Basically set aside, say, half an hour to 45 minutes, okay? And piece of paper, let's just list all of your goals, projects, and tasks. Kind of do it randomly. You know, you don't have to be very disciplined about this. Just so whatever comes to you, just get it out there. Kind of let it hit the ground. Okay. And it's useful to scan the life domain headings, the ones I had earlier, to kind of jog your mind for additional goals, projects, and tasks that you might have forgotten about, or that might occur to you then. It could be a bit of an idea jogger. All right. So as I said, set aside some time, get a piece of paper, or if you want to use a computer or some kind of screen, where however you record stuff, use that, and scan those domain headings to sort of jog your mind. And after you're done, I recommend you carry this list around with you for a little bit, kind of sleep on it. Okay, other items will definitely occur to you. Add them, and then maybe remove items which seem unnecessary. Okay, so this is a real grab bag. It's something that you can do often at one sitting, as the start here at least goes. And then, you know, come back to it and kind of fill it in. Okay? And when the list feels complete, what I urge people to do is to place each of the items into its life domain. Okay, so if you have lists, start to set up your lists as, you know, work, career, or it could be health and wellness. You begin to see kind of what goes where. This is one way of organizing your commitments. Okay, some of the items will be projects, as we begin to realize. Some will be just standalone tasks. Others will be goals that you'll want to break down into projects. But at this stage, it's not that necessary. That's something that you can begin to articulate as you give it more time and you start to focus on it. Okay. Now, here's a sample of a brain dump. So you might list some stuff down. Some of it's going to seem a little trivial. Others will be much more important. Doesn't matter. You'll cross things off as you realize that that's not really relevant, or I can't do that. I can't actually run the 5K charity race, or finishing restoring the wooden fence is, my back hurts me. I can't do that. Okay, but this is just a sort of a beginning of what would be a list, etc. Okay, a sample brain dump. Okay, and this is how it ultimately might stack up. You can see. One way to set this up, you've got career work, and then you have various projects under that: reorganize office space, complete budget report, etc. Mentoring Susan in here. I think it's a good idea to keep an area set aside for projects that are incubating, or possibilities, or things that you've put on hold. I put it in an inactive and kind of maybe file. Like as I've got here, learn, let's say, a new computer program, or something else you're going to do. These are categories you can go back to later on, okay, when you're looking for how to repopulate some of your domains, and you want to kind of make these active, okay? And it's just a great way to keep in touch with some ideas that you've had. You might have a really great idea, something creative, it's a project. Just put it in inactive, maybe, in, say, career work. But you can come up with another category. I just take this as a for instance, right? But the basic structure here, as I say, is you've got the life domain on the top, and then you would have projects organized under those life domains, okay? And a sample project, okay, I just come up with this: reorganize office space. And this is following what I said earlier, broken down into tasks and sub-projects. Okay, in this particular case, 1. Okay, this stuff, the way I look at it, I was doing something like this not long ago. This is something I didn't have to think about any further in terms of learning the office dimensions, but selecting new furniture, I realized that was going to be a little bit more involved, getting file cabinets, which ones am I going to get, etc., etc. So that's a sub-project. And under a sub-project, you'll have various tasks that lead to that. So it's all sort of encased, okay? And in each case, you get to see the big picture in terms of a hierarchy of commitments. And at the very top will be your first step. Okay, so one thing I ask people when they say, hey, I've got a project, how do I get this going? I say to them, okay, well, what is the first thing that you need to do? What is your next step, in other words, to get this off the ground? So always ask yourself that question. I think it's a great exercise. When you've got a project in mind, first thing to ask yourself is, what's the next step I need to take to get this project going? What's the next thing I need to do? And then get that down. And then you can ask a question after that. Well, what do I have to do after that? You may not know sometimes until you do it, but you may also have a sense right off the bat of what you've got to do. Okay? But bringing the question home to yourself in terms of what are the next thing that you need to do, I think is a very good way to kind of coach yourself to put tasks under a project in a hierarchical way. And this is essentially a way of prioritizing, in other words. Okay? So this helps prioritize various steps that lead ultimately to the completion of a project. I don't know how many of you use this particular task management app. It's called Todoist. I think it was 56%, am I right, Jeff, of people use task management apps? I'm very in support of them, okay? A lot of people like to go pencil, pen, and paper. That's fine. If it works for you, my motto is to stick with it. But if you're looking for a way of ultimately having technology work for you in a way that isn't just getting in your way, think about it getting a task manager. As you can see with this one, I'm not so sure if you can see the cursor that I'm pushing around here. It's very geared to the kind of arrangement that I discussed, where you've got here, it says projects, but I would just say life domains. And then it indents to what you would have as projects, and it actually indents 5, as it turns out. For those of you who know how Todoist works, this is something that's probably in the back of your hand. You might be using another Task Manager, there's AnyDo, there's Trello, there's a lot of good stuff out there. Okay, I'm not being paid by Todoist. This is something I have experience with. It's worked. I've tried some others. You know, you might think about it. If you're not happy with the one that you've got, you could shift over. But most of them, while they have certain strong points here, weak points there, they cover the same territory. Okay, and this is a way in which your devices can talk to each other. Okay, you can get projects, tasks, etc., sent to your email account if you need that to be the case, and you can have it interact with your calendar. Just think about the kind of synergies, in other words, that you can get going and that a task management app can facilitate. And this is an example of how it might work. I'll just say in passing that over here is where you would be having your projects, etc., your various tasks. To the right is already the beginning of a kind of daily to-do list or a weekly, and that might hook up with your calendar. So everything's kind of joining forces and keeping you on top of your commitments very steadily, all right? And just to repeat, for those of you who are looking at this and not quite sure, life domains, projects, tasks, how does that fit in? None of these apps come pre-designed for any particular method of self-organization. That's something you ultimately have to kind of work into the app. What works for you? See this person not using life domains, okay, maybe a little bit here and there. The way I would redesign it is to have those domains first, as I said earlier, and then kicking into projects and those kicking into tasks, okay? Just to kind of make this speak to the method that I've been discussing so far. All right, and maybe people will have questions about this kind of thing at the end. That's all I'll say about it for now. Okay, look, I realize that technology can sometimes get in the way. You know, it can sometimes be a huge distraction. It can create more problems than it's supposed to solve, and I think it's a very valid point. But here's a case where it might actually be solving a lot of problems for you and actually making your life more productive, more efficient. Now, quick access lists. So far I've talked about projects that you have that are ongoing. Some of them are incubating. They're sort of on hold. You've got your domains, you've got your projects under your domains, etc., and you're carrying out your tasks. Well, there are many things that one has to do that would be inefficient, say, to put into a project list or to include right off the bat in a life domain. All right, and so what I encourage people to do, and many do this anyway, but I'm just giving it a kind of a name or moniker. The purpose of my talk today is to have some quick access lists. So I'm not someone who's saying you should just go by projects, just go by left domains all day. No, there are certain lists that you're going to want to have that many of you have, which are kind of like catch-alls for on-the-go sort of stuff. Okay, what I suggest is that people have a kind of inbox list. You know, so let's say you've got a task manager, have an inbox. Some of them are built in, some of them aren't. You just have to create it. Or if you're using, say, paper, you've got it in a loose leaf binder. That's how you keep your lists. Have something called inbox, or some people say unsorted. Stuff that comes in which you haven't yet categorized or which needs to be done soon. It's a useful way to do this. Later on, you can go back to this and you can put it into its respective life domain, or you can stick it into a project if you realize it goes there, or have it as a standalone task, etc. But here you have a sort of catcher's mitt for stuff that's coming in. And then I think it's useful to have a quick access list for communication. Okay, some people might want to keep communication commitments in their inbox. I think it's a good idea to coordinate off. And just to make it quite clear, you know, you need to call your mom. Someone might say, well, shouldn't that go in my life domain of like personal or family? And my sense is that if you need to call her, you need to call her soon. Just put it on a list. If it's something that you want to schedule, and I'll talk about scheduling in a minute, that's different. You might put it in a particular area, like a life domain. Could be personal or could be some other kind of commitment. But it's just something that's kind of on the go. Stick it here. Calls, emails, texts, etc. All right. Finally, I think it's good to have what I call a waiting for list. Okay, a waiting for list. And replies from other people. You know, something that you need to get back to someone about, stick it there. And any projects or tasks that you've delegated, you can see them all here. And good idea to indicate the time when you handed something off. This is a great tip, by the way. And it's helped me when there's been some dispute about when someone got something, when they had to get back to me, etc. I put a little date right next to when I've handed off that task. And then, sometimes the time comes, I realize that I haven't heard from them. I get back to them. Instead of saying, gee, was this a month ago? Was it 2 weeks ago? This way you're going to be sitting pretty for that. Okay, so waiting for a list. Just to go back again, inbox, communication, waiting for, okay, I think are three, what I call quick access lists that could be helpful. You may have others. You may design things a bit differently. But the basic distinction between the quick access and then the projects, folders, I think is fundamental. And you'll see that there'll sometimes be a steady migration of tasks from one to the other. It might turn out that one of the calls that you thought you would be making quick, within 10 minutes, actually it's going to be put off, and it's work related, so you'll put it in a project related to that. It could be career development or something else. Okay, and some of that stuff from projects, you might say, hey, I need to do this right now. Just stick it in your communication file, and then you're good to go. Just to review, I talked about goals, projects, and tasks. I should say one thing about goals and projects. Goals, I think, are something which can be a little bit nebulous when stated just as such, and putting aside time to cache them into steps is very important, and I have talked about that. I'm going to get back to that. Life domains and their respective projects. I talked about the brain dump, okay, and how that works. And I did talk a bit about the task manager app, task management app, and finally these quick access lists, inbox, communication, and waiting for. And as I mentioned, you might have some variation on this theme, but hopefully this will be helpful to folks who either have nothing or are looking to kind of retool the system that they've already got. Okay. Part 2. Planning and prioritizing. Jeff, I think you were going to ask another poll question at this point. Here we go.
And you should see it pop up, everybody.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, so what is your biggest challenge in reaching your goals? Okay, there are many possibilities. Is it disorganization? Is it procrastination? Time management? People have some difficulty predicting how long it's going to take them to complete a task. Maybe just completing the task. You have a good idea how long it's going to take you, but you just don't get to the end. You can't get there. External pressure or demands. In this particular case, you might have a system that works for the most part, but you just got a lot going on, and it'd be hard for any system to manage it perfectly. You got a lot bearing down on you, or maybe a lack of motivation. People just feel the plug pulled out from under them. They lose the juice, the electricity to help them get through a task. It's a common problem. I work with people where they just feel unmotivated. Something's going on in their life, and sometimes that can demotivate them. Maybe there's something else, that keeps you from reaching your goals. Okay, so take a little time and just think about what is top for you.
We've got one person who chimed in the chat here. Stefan, can you pick all the top 4 on the list? No cheating, right?
Right, good.
Oh, I see my fellow procrastinators are here in the early results. I get to cheat because I see them as they're coming in, but we've got just about 2/3 of everybody have weighed in. So let's give it one last second here.
Sure.
For those of you who are struggling to pick which one, just go with your gut, and even if you identify with a couple other things on this list, pick the one that you most identify with. And we'll go ahead and publish those results right now. Stefan, you should see them pop up.
Oh, wow. Okay. Disorganization, only 6%. That's pretty good. Procrastination, 37%. Yes, everybody's, well, it's not everybody's, but a lot of people struggle with this. Time management, 18%. Task completion, 8%. External pressure or demands, about almost, that's 24%. And lack of motivation, 8%. No other. It looks like this was pretty comprehensive. Okay. All right. Should I just hit the close on that, or is that okay? You did that.
Gotcha.
All right, great. So look, Buzz, most of you probably use a calendar, or at least a lot of you do. I can't remember what the percentage is, but I definitely suggest using a calendar. And again, a digital calendar is particularly helpful. Google Calendar is a great tool, and I suggest using it for, of course, appointments and then reminders and critical tasks. Here's what I don't suggest: not to use it as a daily to-do list. Some people have suggested, I see that this is popping up in the literature that I read, that you should put your to-do stuff on the calendar. Okay, my view is that the calendar should be reserved for what I call sacred commitments. Stuff that is in place that you know you have to do. And when you open up your calendar, you don't want a lot of stuff suddenly leaping out at you that confuses you. You see what you really need to do. Important information is there. And the stuff that you might be doing today or might not get to, that's not there. Okay? If it's a critical task, of course, you should put it there. Right? But the use of the calendar. Yeah, for those folks who don't use a calendar, I mean, it's a huge advantage. I actually use two. In other words, I have a hard copy calendar on my desk, and then I use a calendar app, and I can kind of toggle back and forth between the two. That way nothing slips between the cracks. So I kind of use it as like a double book entry system, you know. But that might seem crazy to some people. One is enough, fine, do that. As I say, do what works for you. No reason to create more clutter, okay? Daily to-do list, okay? I think it's very important to set aside time for making your to-do list. And I call it, of course, your daily planning session. Rather than doing it on the go or just whenever, set aside time for actually making this list for your planning session. Could be first thing in the morning, is the end of the workday, maybe the evening before going to bed. It's going to be different for different people, but find the time. Okay, I'm personally, I'm amazed really at the number of people who have found that their productivity has really gone through the roof when they've actually set aside time to think about what they need to do. So they don't just have on-the-fly lists. They have a list that has been put together when they've been able to focus and bring together strands of their life, okay? Taking a look at their various projects, taking a look at their life domains, etc., and also stuff that just occurs to them, okay? Getting that on the list. This is hugely important. It's a real kind of multiplier. Personally, I think, by the way, it's a great idea to do this. Look, do it in a way that really kind of hooks up with your biological clock, but doing it the night before can be a serious boost, okay, for you. For one thing, you can sleep on your list. You know, so you might think of stuff sort of unconsciously or something maybe before the time you go to bed, and when you wake up in the morning, whatever, add it to that list. It kind of incubates. And when you go to work the next day, you hit the ground running. You've already got your plan in place. You've got something that says what you're going to be doing. Sometimes the mornings are they can be pressure cookers. You know how that is. And it's hard to focus. Kind of noisy. People are making demands on you. Here you've got everything. Your bed is made, so to speak. So doing the daily to-do list in advance. And then how to write this daily to-do list, okay? Well, here's what I think. You list everything that you want to do or would like to do the next day. Straightforward, okay? I say distinguish between urgent and important tasks. And then identify what I call 1 to 3 most important tasks that day, okay? You might not be able to do everything on your daily to-do list, but commit to doing your MITs, okay? And then I think sort your list into these two parts, tasks that you're scheduling at specific times and tasks that you're not, and then prioritize the latter, okay? And as far as like why the 1 to 3 MITs, you might have heard of something called the Pareto principle, okay, where basically it's like 80% of a certain amount of causes, effects, is produced by 20% of causes. So for example, 20% of salespeople actually make 80% of the sales. They did a study, 20% of pea plants give rise to 80% of the peas. In other words, it's often a small number of things that give rise to the majority of effects in a given domain. This is often true in the case of productivity as well. What tasks are you doing that are really giving you the most bang for your buck, that are the most productive? Focus on those, okay? And don't get distracted with the busy work and all the little stuff. A lot of very busy people, I say this not abusively, but it's true, and it's been the case with me sometimes, very busy are in a sense hiding behind that busyness. So they could be some of the laziest people, even though they seem very busy. They're not focusing on what's really important. Identify most important tasks and make sure that you get to them, okay? And here's an example of, daily to-do list. And I've got, the main thing here is I got the MITs emphasized here. So some stuff is going to be indexed to particular times, schedule, and other stuff over here not. You just fit it in when you can. I'm not somebody who thinks you should schedule everything. It's probably a little crazy, okay? It's hard to keep that up anyway, but important stuff that you need to do, there it is. And I do think it's important to reduplicate on your daily to-do list commitments that you've got on your calendar. Why? That way you see how the day fits together. So yeah, you can look at your calendar, you've got, I'm just taking this for example, a client at say 10 o'clock, but you've also got that on your daily to-do list as well. That way what can I squeak in between that and the next calendar commitment? Well, you've got it right in front of you here, okay? As I said, emphasizing the MIT, most important task, and the other stuff to the right. And I think it's important to have a weekly review, okay? Reserve, say, 20 to 30 minutes at the end or beginning of the week, and then, review the week's accomplishments, delete projects, clean things up, and set your weekly goals, including 3 MITs for the week. Okay, so you've got one for some of the day, some of the week. They may be the same ones. I don't think your life should be a blooming, buzzing confusion of MITs. When you create a weekly to-do list, scan all your lists, especially inactive projects, like I said earlier, activate, toss, ignore, and then brainstorm for new ones. Okay. One thing you'll see too is that your weekly to-do list will probably be a little less detailed, a little more of a kind of an outline than your daily list. That's fine. It's something you'll be filling in as the week goes forward. And I think these are some questions you can ask yourself. I just put them out there. I can send these to people if they want to know what they are. I borrowed them from Chris Bailey, who's written some books on productivity. As you're going through what you want to do this week, these are questions you might ask. What do you need more time on? What do I spend too much time on? Unresolved stuff, opportunities. Am I going in the right direction? And should I add or remove various commitments? Okay, this kind of help you, sort of jogger questions to help you a little bit. All right. As I said, be less detailed and prioritize those MITs. I recommend blocking out time in advance for them if you can. Blocking out that time rather than just saying, I'll get to it. Schedule it, okay, and make it a consistent habit. And lastly, I'm not going to go into much detail here, but I think it's good to have a monthly review, maybe 6 monthly. And if you feel that you've got projects to extend over a year, you'll want to do that too. And when you sit down to do your daily planning, you kind of glance at the monthly. See what you want to add. If the 6 monthly seems relevant. It sounds like a lot's going on here. You might think, wait a minute, I got projects, I've got 6 monthlies, I've got all these lists. Actually, as you start to do this, it becomes automatic. Okay, much of the stuff will already be sort of ironed out. Okay, as you see your projects are in their domains, you just scan that, you kind of know where things are. You've been looking at your monthlies, your sense of goals and priorities there. And when you sit down, it'll just come together rather spontaneously. It's not quite the sort of chaotic jumble that it might seem to you here. Okay, it's a promissory note. Say, try it and see if you like it. Okay. So the review here, I talked about the calendar. Don't use it as a daily to-do list. I talked about the daily to-do list, how to get that going. Writing your daily to-do list, there's a kind of method involved. MITs, way of prioritizing. Weekly review and to-do list, and then some questions that can help. Okay, I flew by those questions. I didn't expect that you'd be able to do a mental snapshot of them, but I might be able to send some of this information to people later on if they want to look at it more closely. And finally, any kind of additional reviews that you'll do. All right. I know we're running up out of time here. The last part is productivity hacks, and then we're done. Jeff, how are we doing as far as time is concerned? Just want to make sure we're on the same page here.
We're totally fine. You got about 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Obviously, we want to leave time for questions, and that's a good reminder to folks. We've got a couple questions that have come in, but please use the Q&A box to ask Stefan the questions that you have from his presentation.
Okay.
But yeah, we've got a few minutes here, Stefan.
Okay, great. I just want to say one thing then before I move on to part 3. It has to do with scheduling. I think it is important in your life to distinguish between what I call the urgent and the important. We have a lot of urgent things, a lot of things that are pressing against us, but they may not be that important in the big picture. So I said this a bit earlier. When you think about your commitments, when you think about the projects that you're pursuing, especially when you think about your most important tasks, separate those from things that might be impinging on you right now and that call for your attention loudly, but ultimately they kind of pass. You don't want anything to be distracting you from those MITs. And scheduling. I've emphasized scheduling early, and I can't emphasize scheduling enough. Scheduling really forces you to be realistic. Scheduling is a way of actually making priorities, because you see what you have to throw out. When you get a look at your day and you are overly optimistic, as I tend to be, as everyone is, I think, you make a list of what you've got to do and you try to put it into the slots. You realize, gee, this can't fit. You have to throw it out, okay? It forces you to make decisions, and voila, you've prioritized. So people often say, how do I prioritize? And I think there are many theories about this. What I found is that when my back is against the wall, I discover that, gee, I prioritize not necessarily super easy, but more easy than when stuff is just floating up in the air. So scheduling is key here. and making that a habit. In a sense, the more you schedule, the better. I do think you can schedule to the max and be overscheduled. That's certainly possible. I believe that one's daily to-do list should be flexible. You don't want to be rigid about it. But if you can schedule things in, that will help with prioritization, and it will ensure that your MITs actually get accomplished. Okay, productivity hacks. So identifying your most productive time is very important here. Talk about tasks that you perform that give you the most for the effort that you put in, the MITs. When is your energy level at its highest? That's typically when you are most productive. You know, some people are most productive at certain times of the day. Sometimes after you eat, you get a boost of energy. Other people go to sleep after they eat. They're totally unproductive. Okay, they go into lapse into a coma after they eat. But maybe that's something that helps you. Some people are really productive after they exercise. I found this to be sometimes the case in my life. It just gives me something. So maybe after you exercise, okay? So which is to say, let's say you exercise in the morning, it might be the thing to do when you get to work. You've already got your, let's say, your to-do list in hand. You get straight to your MIT, because that's what you can really drill down into that. Okay, but you might know, hey, that doesn't work for me. I'm really good just after lunch. So you know yourself. Okay, if you're not sure, keep an activity log. You know, some people don't know. It's unclear to them. Just keep a loose activity log when you see you're really doing the things you need to be doing most productively. Bingo. Okay, start scheduling stuff for there. When your MIT meets your MPT, excuse the acronyms here, your most productive time, that's the sweet spot. Okay, when you're able to get your most productive tasks set at that time. Okay, so schedule MITs, and I say during your productive time, or sometimes people's most productive tasks, their most important tasks, excuse me, kind of weigh on them throughout the day. So get them done early in the morning. That's often just a rule of thumb. And of course, if your energy is very low, then I wouldn't recommend doing it. Okay, but again, this is a case where you kind of have to look at your life and customize. Right? Now, as far as overcoming procrastination, there's so much been written on this. Wow. And I'm not going to attempt to treat this by any means exhaustive. I only have two things to say, actually, about this. And I wanted to say it in line with what I've been saying here. Okay? But I got to say, I don't know if anyone has come up with the silver bullet for overcoming procrastination. I've read a number of books, and some of them are okay, but it's one of these kind of quantum problems. What I've seen, though, is that whenever you're resisting a tough task, break it down into even smaller, trivial parts. So I know I defined a task earlier as something that you don't have to break down anymore. Right. But you can always think of smaller parts that you probably could break it down into if you thought about it. Okay? And then begin with the first small part and just get started. So if it means something simple like turning on the computer, you have to write a document, opening up MS Word. What I found is that when people just start doing these small things, they get closer to doing more. And there's a kind of a chain reaction. They get into doing things. Now, I get it. Sometimes making that first move can be hard. But the smaller a thing is, the easier it is to digest. So break it down to that sort of, that atom or that little molecule that you can stomach, that little morsel that you can eat. Take it from there. Okay, and string yourself along that way. I didn't give an example here, but you might be able to think of some on your own. If it just means, as I said, pulling up a chair, making a phone call. Don't worry about completing. Don't think about the end. Just think about the beginning here. People often are paralyzed because they think of the total picture. It's okay for life domains when you're considering tasks, etc., in the context of overall productivity. But if a particular task is hanging you up, think about it this way. I also think sometimes when you don't know how to think about a task, there too, just break it down into smaller pieces, and the task as a whole will start to become more vivid for you. And when something's more vivid, that tends to capture our imagination more. We can see it, and we do it. That hooks up right into scheduling. Much easier to see yourself doing something when you scheduled it at a certain time of the day than when it's just any old time. It's on your list. You got a to-do list, but it hasn't actually been stapled down to anything. Okay? The power of the concrete taps into our will, and it motivates us. Reducing distractions. Here's a lot of things. Avoid multitasking if you can. I know that some jobs just require that you juggle a lot, but research shows over and over again that even people who do well at multitasking do better when they don't. They don't make as many mistakes, for example. Okay, and they're just overall more efficient. And avoid busy work. Okay, mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this is a huge distraction because it often makes us feel busy. Trying to distinguish between the urgent, the important, keeping that in mind in terms of your MIT, your most important task, think is helpful here. And of course, say no to people who impose on time with unnecessary requests for favors. This sounds like some people say, hey, Kalt, that's me, is telling us to be selfish and not to help people. No, that's not my point at all. I just think that there are instances, I work with many clients who want to help people. That's great, but they're not helping themselves. They're helping other people so much. So learning to say no can be a challenge for many. Practice it, okay? And delegate, of course. You can delegate tasks, do it. Think of what task are you doing right now that someone else could do. I bet everybody could think of 1, 2. And even more, what task that you're doing now can you think of someone else who could do better? Contact that person, you know? Some cases, you've got some dough lying around, you've got money, hire people to do things. I know people who they've got the cash, they've got the money on hand, but they feel they should do it because there's a kind of work ethic involved. If it's getting in the way of your most important tasks, offload it if you can. Okay, and I suggest just use your imagination to think of how that might be possible to clear up the day. So much about being more productive is getting rid of the rubble that's in the road. Okay, reducing distractions. If your workspace has a door, it may not. Okay, but if it does, close it. I've worked with people who have an office. They feel that they need to keep the door open because they have to be accessible all the time. That's not true. They often think they have to be accessible all the time. They have to be accessible at some times. Other times, it's better to double down on the things they need to do to be productive. To schedule that block time. Put a sign on the door if you're someone who has a hard time, keeping the door closed and telegraphing to others that this is sort of sacred time for you. Okay? With email, guys, I urge scheduling email specific times during the day. We're always at the email. If that's not bothering you, then don't worry about it. But if you find that your time is being hijacked by constantly checking email, etc., schedule it. A few times during the day, maybe. I'll leave that up to you as to how many times would work. Okay? Guilt will sometimes start to well up in you, or fear, I'm missing important emails, or I got to get to those emails. I urge you to resist that. After a while, the guilt will just dissipate. There are, of course, cases where you just have to check email. You know what those cases would be, but I'm talking about this as an overall practice, okay? I think it's also important to have a touch-it-once mentality for email, okay? Unless there's a special email that you can't deal with right on the spot, again, schedule time to handle it, rather than just going there at some point in the day and then suddenly having your day, again, hijacked by something that just came up. Namely, you feel that you have to deal with this right now, and it kind of shunts something else that you should be doing. But on the touch-it-once philosophy, you can avoid this with a lot of emails coming in, which aren't all that important, I think. We get so much junk email. Keep them short. I work with clients who write elaborate emails, trying to spell all sorts of things out, being very polite, etc. I don't think you should be rude. And I don't think a person should be so brief as to be not communicating essentials. But I've seen a lot of people can make shorter emails, Keep it brief, to the point, and you'll be golden. More. Unsubscribe from as much as you can. Got a lot of stuff coming in, Again, it sometimes it interests me to see how many stuff people could unsubscribe from that they haven't. Guys, I don't know if it really makes sense to get your email box to 0. There's a lot of people going for this. Get your email box to 0. Studies have shown that retrieving emails from your various categories and files, etc., takes more time than just looking them up using the search function. Okay? Yes, there are some emails you want to keep in certain particular files, categories, etc. But in many cases, it's probably too much trouble, more trouble than it's worth to get down to 0, especially since hardly anybody keeps it there. It just kicks back up. Okay, so I don't kill yourself over it. Okay, think before CC or forwarding, because the more emails you send, the more you get. Do you really want to be part of that? That email round? Think about it. That's going to suck you in. It might be very important. Obviously, there are certain communication circles you've got to be a part of. But again, I'm struck by how much CCing and forwarding people don't have to do that they do, and then they wonder why they're getting emails back. Think about that. Okay. With social media too, like I said, with emails, limit check-ins to a few scheduled check-ins per day. That can be tough. Facebook is very alluring. Okay, and other stuff, Instagram and so on. But again, limiting those check-ins. Okay. As far as the cell phone is concerned, I say turn off as many email, text notifications, beeps, buzzes as you can. Okay. Talking to people they didn't even know what they could turn off or that they could turn off. It can all be turned off. Put it on silence. And if you really don't want to be disturbed while you're working, put it in another room. If you forgot to turn something off, that way you've got your time to do what you need to do, and you're not going to be interrupted by the little robot that is our smartphone. Okay, the internet, guys, this is tough. Some people are addicted to internet. They're constantly on the internet. Web blockers. They say, well, yeah, but I can just undo that. Give the password to someone you trust. That's tough. Yeah, they've got, so to speak, the keys, okay? How serious are you? I mean, how serious is the problem? If the problem is really serious, if you're really wasting time, desperate situations call for desperate measures. This might be something you need to do. Guys, use simpler passwords sometimes, and not too simple. You don't want to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. People will just get into that right off the bat. But I've discussed this with some clients who've used very complex passwords, and they can't remember them. They're constantly putting them in, and they're making mistakes. Think about your passwords and try to gear them appropriately to the website that you're using them for, okay? Guys, I think it's great to take short breaks during the day to restore energy and focus. And if you can, again, schedule. I had on my little 15 minutes. It could be less, 10 minutes. Just a breather. Sometimes that's not possible. I respect that, okay? Sometimes it is, do it, okay? Reboot. This will help your productivity. It will help increase focus, okay? I know meditation is sort of all the thing. Some of you may have done it. Maybe some of you are doing it. If you haven't, give it a shot. If you've done it and didn't like it, give it a second shot. The studies are just overwhelming. That just seems to help people manage stress and increases their ability to focus. I'd be curious to know from people, we can't get into this in any detail here, what their experience is. We can do that offline, okay, in terms of meditation. But the science seems to be decisive here. Okay, guys, if you find it very difficult to maintain focus, yes, I consider getting evaluated maybe for ADD. May not be your issue at all, but it might be. It might just be. If you find it really hard to stay focused, you're feeling constantly like you're about to explode to 4,000 pieces, task management lists just disappear, things seem to be floating in front of your eyes, it's very hard to pin anything down, it's hard to listen to people for long, you're constantly thinking ahead of what people are saying, and many more characteristics which kind of a family connection with each other could be ADD, okay? You'd be amazed at what medication could do. When you find the right medication, it might be helpful, and some of the productivity hacks that you're using now, you won't even have to use, okay? So I'll talk about this once more at the end, okay? Consider this. Increasing energy, you guys know about this. Exercise regularly, I say 3 times a week. The studies are incontrovertible. The people who do this have more energy, if you can. If you have a job where you're just burning the midnight oil, I don't know what to say. It might be time for a new job if you can do it. But if you can find the time, maybe just twice a week, do some exercising, especially aerobic stuff, to really increase your energy. Okay. Sufficient sleep. I meet with clients and we're puzzling as to why they're not able to get anything done, why they're inefficient, why they're forgetting things, and going around until finally we discover the person's not sleeping. They're just not getting enough sleep. 8 hours is still considered to be pretty good. Maybe 7. It does vary for people. Okay. This may seem obvious to you. You're thinking, why is he telling me this? Check and see how much sleep you're actually getting. A great night's sleep, nothing substitutes for that. Okay, and of course, eating healthy stuff. I'm not going to dwell on this. I'm not a dietitian, but all I can say is that we get these highs from sweet drinks and carbs, etc., and then there's usually a crash afterwards. And the spike is generally in energy is not worth the later crash. Okay, so I think the best thing to drink, frankly, is just water. Okay, but whatever, stay away from sweet stuff. And finally, moderating caffeine intake. Again, was working with a client. He couldn't figure out why the heck he was basically bouncing off the walls all day. I didn't even bother to ask him about caffeine. We were just talking about other things. But it came up. Guy's drinking coffee all the time. He's mainlining coffee. So I say don't drink after 4 and moderate this if you can. It's hard. Caffeine is very addictive. Okay. Finally, here's what I think it's a good thing to do is to keep an accomplishments list as a kind of boost for yourself. Okay, so during your daily planning, ask yourself if you accomplished anything important or substantive. It does not have to be earth-shattering. It should be something solid, as they say here. And sometimes, nothing will make that list. This is a good thing. It's a good thing to do. Okay, add them to a weekly accomplishments list. So if you feel that this is something worth remembering, put it on my weekly accomplishments list, and then review this list during your weekly review. Okay, select the top 5 items and add that to a monthly accomplishments list. Why? Because they'll be more important. So, speaking, you'll be able to put together to sort of corral the important things that you did during the month. Say top 5, 1 to 5. Okay, and when you're feeling a little unproductive or ineffective or maybe kind of droopy, you think, gee, I don't get anything done. You might discover you actually do get stuff done. Okay, review the list. you begin to say, gee, actually, okay, when I focus, when I, have been sort of on the job, this is what I've done. I've worked with folks who beat themselves up. They don't do anything. They don't accomplish anything. Actually, they are accomplishing things, but they don't have it all in view. And when they see it, that can have a profound effect. It can give you a little boost, gives you a sense of progress, and also it can be a talking point. If you ever are putting together your resume or something like that, you want to discuss what you've been doing with people, you can access this list. You say, gee, I've really done all this stuff. This is amazing. Write onto your resume, put it onto your profile, LinkedIn, etc. Okay. So just to review, I talked about your most productive time, how to intersect with your most important tasks, and then you'll be most effective at reaching your goals. I made one point about how to overcome procrastination and did not for 1 second think that's the only way to do it. But it seems germane relative to the themes that have been coming up here. Talking about reducing distractions is often the most important, significant obstacles, okay, in the way of productivity. Sometimes it's not a matter of sort of leaning in. It's a matter of getting things out of the way, increasing your focus, ways that can be done, even if it requires medication. No shame there. Really, no shame there. You need something to help. I'm not talking about doing drugs. I'm talking about going to someone who is a qualified physician, etc. How to increasing energy, okay? Various practices and habits to do that. And then finally, keeping accomplishment lists. This can be useful also just in terms of boosting your self-esteem. It serves many functions. Biggest tip, I believe, is hanging out with productive people, folks. A lot has to do with who you associate with. You're with people who sort of are having their eye on goals, they plan, they get stuff done, they're reliable, they have a sense of where they're going, okay? Hang out with them. You'll find that it's a little bit it kind of infect you. And also, you can brainstorm with such people. I think a great thing to do is to have a productivity partner, someone you check in with every now and then to see if you're meeting your goals. Okay, you could do this like once every 2 weeks, maybe. Okay, set someone aside. There are things that you're having a hard time, particular goals you're having a hard time meeting. You need some accountability. So bring someone into this equation, and that person, could be a third person. Doesn't matter how many, but it could be a small group. But let's say you get an accountability partner, can do wonders to help. Okay, in terms of reaching overall set of goals. Okay, so that's what I've got for today. I hope I made it under the wire here. Did I, Jeff?
Just barely.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's it. Last slide here is just some contact information. Okay, you can contact me, Leading Minds Executive Coaching. In terms of physical space, we're located in Belmont, but I actually do a lot of my coaching via Skype. I do phone coaching, so there's different ways to slice this up. I do international coaching. It doesn't matter. And as you can see here, I'm happy to give you a 20-minute consultation if you want to learn more about how to increase your productivity. I also work with clients across a variety of issues, including professional development, job transition, work with different professionals. Some are lawyers, for example. Others might be in tech. Others are executives who are trying to get 1 foot up, move up the ranks in their company, etc. What do they need to do? What next steps do they need to take? Do they need some accountability from me as a kind of accountability partner, etc., etc., etc. That's what I do. And finally, look, if what I said about ADD, you think it might apply to you, or you know someone maybe who could benefit, a colleague of mine, he works for Leading Minds. There's no kickback here. It's just separate. Okay, this person is a psychiatrist, MD. He can evaluate people for this and can also work with them, okay, to help them achieve their goals with ADD in mind as an obstacle. So listen, that sums it up. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope what I said was helpful. I hope some of it was helpful, that there's some takeaways for you here. And I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Great. We do have some awesome questions that have come in, but thank you, Stefan. And for those of you who have to run, it is 1 o'clock and can't stick around for the Q&A. I'd encourage you to follow up with Stefan directly here. He's left his contact info. And Stefan, again, thank you for this offer for everybody for the free 20-minute consultation. That's amazing. Sure. All right. So Lisa asked early on when you were talking about some of the organization apps, you had talked about sort of the importance of having quick access lists.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more how you would do that in an app? And Lisa's question was specifically about making sure that she's not sort of having to do multiple or duplicate entries.
Right. Okay, so the way I do it is that in the first row where I have life domains, and if I click life domain, it opens up to various projects, which then themselves open up to sub-projects and tasks. At the very top, I have my quick access. So I have my inbox, I have my communications, I have my waiting for. You might have another one. I put those at the very top so I see them right away. Okay, and then above that, I actually have a daily to-do list, but that's another thing. In terms of the architecture of, say, Todoist, which is the app that I use. Now, you're asking about reduplication. Okay, this is a bit of an issue. You might discover that, yes, one of the, say, decisions you made to call someone could be in your work career app. You moved to your communication app, okay, and you didn't delete it. Well, during your weekly review, that's when you can delete it. That's when you can sort of tighten things up and clean things up and remove all these unnecessary reduplications. There will be those reduplications from time to time. It happens. I don't see any way around it. That'll be the case with the calendar as well. Okay, it might have critical tasks, as I said, that are also reflected in your daily to-do list, which then might be in your communication list that you didn't delete. Okay, but when you do your weekly review, or even you can do it the night before review, you'll see quickly how some of these are reduplicating. Just get rid of them then. Okay, but just to get right back to the beginning, yes. So have those quick access at the top, I say, that way they don't sort of fall into the cracks, and then look at the projects, etc. after that. One way to do it.
Great. Stefan, Adrian is wondering, you talked about ADHD, you talked about procrastination, but do you have any special advice for somebody who is struggling with both?
Both ADD and procrastinate at the same time? Wow,
exactly.
This is pretty good. I think that for someone who has ADD, it's best to focus on less. So sometimes I've met with someone, and it could be a particular session that I've got, and they'll come with a very ambitious list of things they want to do. When I've worked with folks with ADD, that list gets shrunk to a bare minimum, for starters. And the less that you've got to do, the better chance you'll do it. That's the basic principle that I've got. Folks with ADD, even less. Now, there's going to be a threshold. There's a survival minimum of things you need to do for your job. But the people's problems tend to be in the other direction. They want to do too much, not too little. Okay? So I think first thing here is just getting a sense of what it is, what your commitments really are, and putting those on a diet. Okay? And then going through with the various steps of breaking things down. So folks with ADD, what's the next step that you've got to do? Okay, make this critical, make this a regular habit. And when it's a part of an overall daily habit of thinking through just a small number of tasks that you're doing, it tends to boost productivity. That's been my experience working with ADD people. There are other things I could talk about too, but I'll limit myself to that right now since it's kind of connects with some things I've already said. There you go.
Chantel has asked a question, and Chantel, I'm going to sort of change it up here a little bit. You mentioned the importance of delegation in your chat. Chantel works for a very small organization of about 5 full-time employees. So if you're feeling like delegation isn't an option, are there other things on your sort of hacks list that you would recommend focusing on?
Well, I think elimination. So this may not apply to the specific example, but I've sometimes realized that jobs, tasks, even projects that people have, they could probably shrink them. Okay, they've got too much going on. They haven't actually thought through how to make this more efficient in the first place. So that's one place to go. Another thing, this may speak to your budget. I don't know in what way, but yes, 5 people, there's going to be limited resources there. Is it possible to outsource something? Is it possible to bring someone in who's not in your organization to do the thing that you need to do? Okay, the funds will certainly be a question there, but there's also ways to do this in a kind of quid pro quo. Some people can help you, but you'll help them back. Okay, so they might do something for you, and you'll think of what you can do for them later on down the line and set this up as an arrangement. So that's one way to farm things out if you haven't got the money to cover it. In addition to looking at the other end, maybe is there a way to make this process, to streamline this process, make it more efficient in the first place? By the way, that's what I often help people do. They've got a lot going on. It could be a small business, and we sit down and decide, okay, what is it that you can get rid of, in fact, that you think you need to do but you don't actually need to do, and how can we render some of this workflow ultimately more effective for you?
Last question, and it's a good one. You talked a little bit about how email controls a lot of us. And the question is, do you have any suggestions or advice for how to organize emails that you need to keep? Things that you've completed but you want to file away. This person is feeling that they spend too much time figuring out their filing system and that it's sort of creating a challenge for them.
All right. I think you can have some just larger kind of catch-all files as opposed to files that are specific to an individual like a project or a person. So you can do in your email system what I've talked about in your general planning system. You can have a waiting for file, stuff you know you need to get to, but you can't deal with it right now, but you don't want to kind of clogging the space of your inbox. Put it there. You can have most important, okay? So most important emails you've got to get to, I'll have a separate file as well. You can have also information. So, you know, some emails you get, you don't have to act on them. You don't have to get back to anybody, but you want to keep those emails because it has important information. I put those in separate files. So what I think a useful way to do this, as I'm saying, I'm just kind of spelling it out, is to come up with come up with some general purpose files that will help you without having to cause you to go down a foxhole of individual commitments relative to this person or that organization or what have you. Think of what they could be, okay? Also, some people will have emails come back to them later. You can use Boomerang. You can use their various apps that enable you to get emails at certain times. They're out of view and they're sent to you at a later date. Okay, this can also be helpful. So it's kind of in cyberspace to some extent, but if not lost, Boomerang, check it out. It'll help in a situation like that. Yeah.
Stefan, this was awesome. You packed a ton into a short period of time, so that's okay. But thank you so much for doing this for the BU community, and again, your generous offer to follow up with folks.
Absolutely.
Really, fantastic. So thank you on behalf of the whole university. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our guests for participating today. Thank you for those of you who stuck around for the Q&A as we ran over a little bit. People are asking questions about some of the material we've covered already. I just want to remind folks that this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the BU Alumni Relations website at bu.edu. Thank you, everybody who's donated to BU. We really appreciate your support. And if any BU alumni you know, or if you would be interested in doing a webinar like this, I'll ask you to please contact me directly at the Alumni Relations Office or by email at jtmurphy@bu.edu. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day or a great evening, wherever you might be.
All right.
Thanks, Stefan.
Thank you, Jeff. Take care.